Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to issue a correction, a mea culpa, sort of, kind of, but we'll get there. Evidently, I did a little video recently, actually, but if this is the year, 3872, it doesn't really matter when the original video ran. Anyway, I did a video about correcting the trumpet parts at the end of the first movement of Beethoven's Eroica Symphony, where I made the case that they really are better when you correct them. And that case is not in any way impaired by the following discussion. However, it turns out that Beethoven's trumpets could probably play the actual notes to do the entire phrase. They just didn't. Beethoven wouldn't write it that way. Now, that begs a very, very interesting question. But we'll get to that interesting question in a moment. The first point I want to make is that if I said that because Beethoven had natural trumpets, and natural trumpets couldn't play those notes, and they can, I was wrong. I'm not an expert in the mechanism of trumpets and natural trumpets and all of that stuff. I was operating on information that I had been told and read about for decades, and there's a lot of false information circulating. We basically use the information that we get from sources that we trust, from sources that we think have expertise that we don't, and I make no pretense to having expertise that I don't have. I was operating on received knowledge. And if that knowledge was incorrect, then it was incorrect. Period. So, that having been said, there are two issues that come up. One is the incredible snarkiness of some of the people making this point, because they were naturally doing it in the most arrogant way possible, which is how dare you say that? I mean, how dare you not know what natural trumpets can do the way I know what natural trumpets can do? That's a typical classical music thing. I know it's even older than that classical music. It's the who has the bigger penis school of argument. Remember that? For you people who are fans of machismo, as it applies to cultural products. It's absolute stupidity and ridiculousness and arrogance and whatnot. Of course I don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. I mean, there's so many billions of details, and I'm a generalist, and I love music generally, and I learn as much as I can, but it's an ongoing process. So, what can I say except that the people who put the point across could have done it a little bit more graciously. It wouldn't have killed them, but I give them full credit for knowing more about this than I do, and so they can take that, plus a dime and go buy a cup of coffee. Anyway, that's one thing. The other thing is this. Why didn't Beethoven use those notes? Well, there are only two reasons why he didn't use those notes. The first reason is that he did not trust the trumpeters who he had, at his disposal to play them with reliability. Because remember, in those days, trumpeters were members of the military barracks mostly. I mean, they were not art music trumpeters. They were, town crier type trumpeters. They sat in a watchtower and blew the hour at noon, and, they did military stuff, and, you requisitioned timpani from the local barracks. I mean, they were not known for their subtlety and their artistry. Beverly Gerald, who wrote fabulous studies of wind playing in classical period and brass playing, made the point that these people were probably completely loud and unsubtle, and if they could read music well at all, I mean, that was really hard to find trumpeters who were going to realize the ensemble values of a classical orchestra. So it's entirely possible that Beethoven just didn't trust his trumpeters. The other reason, based on Beethoven's own practice, that is the top notes that he would use for trumpets that were crooked, meaning had their tubing, fixed up to play in the keys that he needed them. There were certain notes he just wouldn't use. He never went higher than certain notes. He wouldn't use, et cetera, and things like that. And that was one of the points one of these people made, which is really very interesting. Because if Beethoven didn't use those notes or wouldn't use trumpets in those keys or in those ranges, the reason is because they sounded like crap. It's the only possible explanation. And if they sounded like crap, then we come back to our original proposition. And that original proposition was that Beethoven didn't write that phrase for the trumpets because the natural trumpets of his day couldn't play it. And whether they couldn't play it because the trumpeters sucked, or the instrument sounded like hell, or Beethoven just didn't know enough about trumpets to be bothered with it, the problem was the natural trumpet of the day. It may be that the problem was not that the notes didn't exist on the instrument. They may have existed, but they weren't usable as far as Beethoven was concerned. And so all of this falderall about what natural trumpets could and could not do is completely irrelevant to the question of whether or not that phrase ought to be given to trumpets today who can play it magnificently. And if Beethoven had had trumpets that could play it magnificently, would he not have given that phrase to the trumpets? It changes absolutely nothing. So it's one of those little tidbits of trivia. But I mean, it's an interesting tidbit of trivia. The fact that, yes, maybe trumpets could have played those notes. Now we know. And we know it's completely unimportant to the basic point. It often happens that way, doesn't it? But I did want to make that correction because I don't want people to go around thinking that natural trumpets have issues that they didn't have, or did they have those issues because Beethoven didn't use them? What difference does it make? The truth has come out. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.